Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar. I hope you're doing very well today. My name is Cristina Yiguren, and I'm the coordinator of International Graduate Services and Support Center. I want to remind you that we are recording this webinar so that you can watch it later again on our YouTube channel, and you're also going to get a recording shortly. Also want to invite you to follow us on our social media accounts where you can get the latest information about the center, our upcoming events. We will be having a SELPIP event next month, as well as probably an immigration and other immigration event next month about the international student stream and a French webinar as well. So I really recommend you to stay tuned so you won't miss any of the information. This center is dedicated to assisting you, our international graduates, as you seek employment and settle into Canadian life following graduation. Our international graduates from all four campuses have access to immigration, career advice, and networking events. Also, there are countless reasons why you can take pride in being a Lambton graduate, as I'm also very proud of working here. We've been ranked as one of Canada's top research colleges, and we're here to support you all the way, even after graduation, with the services I just mentioned to you. Today, we're going to have an amazing event with Velosa Immigration about questions, Q&A. There are many questions that we got when you registered for this webinar. We're going to go through all of them. Just something very quickly. We got some very general questions like, what's the best pathway for me? And we don't really know your background. So without that information, it's going to be very complicated to actually give you some information. But you will see how great Sandra is, and she will try her best to explain all those answers to you as well. Sandra is the founder and CEO at Velosa Immigration, and she's going to go in detail to all of your questions. So I hope and I'm sure you will get great value in today's session. Sandra and graduates, thank you so much for joining us today. I will pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Cristina. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, for allowing me to be here. I will try my absolute best to answer all of your questions. As Cristina mentioned, it's difficult sometimes to answer your questions without really having a context of your situation and following up questions. Nonetheless, we will try our very best. Before getting started, I just want you to get to know a little bit about the company and who we are. So Velosa Immigration is a Canadian-based company. We specialize in all immigration advice, except refugee cases, but any other cases we do take. We've assisted more than 500 families in Canada, as well as outside of Canada. If you visit our Instagram, we do have a large following. Most of our clientele comes from Latin America, and that's because I'm originally from Colombia. My parents graduated from Colombia, and I've been living in Canada for more than 10 years now. So my pathway was a bit different, but I can relate to those that have made Canada their second home. I'm a regulated immigration consultant. I graduated from the University of Toronto with a bachelor degree in criminology and political science. I shortly after started working in the public sector with youth at risk, as well as for a non-for-profit organization with Employment Ontario. And then right after that, I started working in the private sector, specifically for a private college. But I wanted to follow my dream, my pathway. And so I decided to enroll myself at Humber College to become an immigration consultant. And here we are. The business was started during the pandemic, so we're exclusively virtual office, which allows us to have flexibility in working with people from all over the world. So we've had clients from Australia, Europe, all of Latin America, I mean, you name it, even Nigeria, etc. So we've worked with numerous people from all over the world, and I think that's one of the positive things that we can take from COVID, is that it opened a lot of doors to meet people elsewhere. In partnership with Lambton, and for those that have attended the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to receive 10% off in the month of March in any processes that you want to do, whether it's a PGWP application, a visitor visa application, whether you're applying for your permanent residence through a PNP or express entry, whatever the case may be, just let us know that you attended the webinar. More than glad to put this discount on the quote that we provide you with. You can also book a consultation with us, whether it's 1 hour or 30 minutes. so we can better assess your case if you feel like you want your question to be answered and it wasn't answered during the presentation. All right, so I'll go ahead and read the questions that were provided to me. My goal is really to try to answer them to the best of my abilities with the information that I have. So we'll get started. So it wasn't a question, it was more like a statement about spousal open work permits and visitor visa issues. I'm going to assume that you meant refusals, right? Like, what are some of the reasons why someone would get refused a spousal open work permit? One of the reasons why, or one of the most common reasons is that when someone's applying for the spouse, they're not showing that the main applicant, means the main applicant, the worker, has either a valid job offer or hasn't showed pay stubs. Right now, we know that only spouses of certain workers can obtain a spousal open work permit, meaning if you have a job offer in a tier 0 or 1, or if it's a tier 2 or 3, then your job offer has to be in a specific occupation as per the government website. So incorrect documentation, maybe you haven't provided information about you're married or you're in a common law relationship. Immigration may not believe that you're in a relationship, a genuine relationship. They may think that you're solely providing an application to get benefits for a spousal open work permit. So that could be another reason why you would face an issue. Or your job offer simply doesn't meet the criteria. So we now know that occupations in tier 4 and 5 are not eligible to have their spouses accompany them, right? So, or perhaps the time duration on the main applicant's contract is in 16 months. So that's another reason right now why maybe the spousal open work permit could be refused. So there's a lot of reasons. One of the reasons why your visitor visa may be refused is because you don't have home ties to your country, right? So lack of home ties, lack of travel history. So even though there's legal precedent that states that it shouldn't be a reason why an officer refuses an application, they will take this into consideration. So obviously, if someone's traveled to other countries or has previous visas, they're more likely to get a Canadian visa approved as opposed to someone that doesn't. If you have refusals in the past and can't really provide a reason as to why, they're going to take this into consideration. Financial means, if you're not showing that you have enough funds to fund your stay in Canada, they're going to take that into consideration. There's a lot of reasons why a visitor visa would be refused. Intention to come to Canada as well. Who's providing you the invitation letter? What's their status right now? What's the reason for your trip? So many reasons. So I hope that answers that question. Another question that we got was, when my student visa expires and I'm applying for PGWP, do I need to apply for the PGWP and visa to stay legally? How is the transition? This is a very good question. And to answer it, we need to understand the difference between a permit and a visa. One of the misconceptions is that people think that they're the same thing, and they're not. When you're outside of Canada and you apply for your study permit or your study visa, when it's approved, the Canadian government requests your passport. And this is because you're going to receive a visa or an ETA in order for you to be able to travel into Canada. Once you arrive in Canada and the immigration officer asks you several questions, what are you going to do here? Where are you going to study, et cetera, et cetera. I think all of you guys have gone through this process. You're going to be issued a permit. That permit is that brown paper that you have with you that states what DLI you're attending, what program you're in, et cetera, et cetera. With that being said, the second time around, when you're in Canada now and you do an extension, so that means apply for your PGWP, or you're going to extend your study permit, you're no longer going to be issued another visa. So these are two processes. So the second time around, when you apply for your PGWP, you can continue to be in the country for as long as your PGWP is valid. However, you have to be cautious of your passport visa. If the visa is expired and you want to leave the country, you have to request a visitor visa and you have to have a valid permit in order for this one to be issued. I'll give you an example. I had somebody on a work permit fly to Colombia, and she emailed me and said, Sandra, they're not letting me on the plane because I don't have a visa. I have a visitor record and I have a work permit, but I don't have a visa. I'm like, yeah, they won't let you in. You have to have a visa. So it's very important that you check your eligibility before you leave the country. Other options to extend work permits after expiration of PGWP just to buy time. Let's be cautious about that. So there's a lot of people right now that are applying. We all know that in order for you to be under maintained status, you have to submit an application before the expiry of your current permit. So if you have a study permit and you submit a study permit application, you're going to maintain the previous status. Same applies for a work permit. Some students, what we've seen, are applying for a work permit, knowing that they don't, or applying for a PGWP extension, knowing that it's going to be refused just to buy time. Well, what's happening is that you're receiving a refusal letter telling you that you have to leave the country. They're not even giving you time now to restore. So we have to be very careful. If your PGWP is about to expire, you need to find ways to stay in Canada the right way. Whether it is you have an employer that wants to support an application of an LMIA, or if you're eligible to have a job offer that's LMIA exempt because you now speak a CLB5 French, and you can apply for the Franco mobility, or you're from a country that has a free trade agreement. So there's a lot of countries, specifically in Latin America and some in Europe, that have bilateral agreements with Canada that allow people to apply for an LMI exempt work permit. There's certain criteria to meet, but nonetheless, we want to make sure that if we're doing this the right way. If these aren't any options for you, then I think it's best that you switch over to a visitor record. So you want to change your status to a visitor in Canada to buy time, to see what's going to happen with your status. And at that time, I would highly recommend that you speak to us or any other legal representative that can assist you to see what are your options. Is it possible to apply for a closed work permit when an open work permit expires? Yes, as long as you meet all the eligibility criteria. So in order for the government to issue you a work permit, you have to have legal standing that you're eligible for one. Legal standing means you have a job offer. You have a job offer that it's either supported by an LMIA or is exempt from meeting one, right? So as long as you can prove that, then you will be granted the work permit. Now, I want to be clear. Just because an employer has an LMIA and now you've applied for a work permit doesn't necessarily mean that your work permit will be approved. It is your responsibility to prove to the immigration officer that you have the qualifications to perform the duties of that position. So oftentimes the biggest mistakes that a lot of applicants do is they will not show job references that are relevant to the job offer being offered. They may not show that they have the English or French proficiency to meet the requirements of the position. So many things, right? So you want to make sure that you're showing that you have previous experience, relevant experience, in order to justify that you could do the role that you're being hired for. Now we're going to get into Canadian experience class. How would we calculate 1 year experience for Canadian experience class if there are leaves taken? So we have to understand that the 1 year is really based in hours and not necessarily time, right? So for the Canadian experience class, you have to have 1,560 hours, which equates to 1 year of work experience if you've been working for 30 hours a week. So if you have leaves, then you have to make sure that you have 1,560 hours, and it may take you longer to reach the 1 year per se because you've had some leaves, but as long as you have that amount of hours, then it should be fine. It doesn't have to be in the same knock or occupation as long as it's a skilled position. I will be eligible for Canadian experience class only after December, upon 1,560 hours, but can I create an express entry profile now and update it later? This is a very good question because a lot of people might not know this, but we know that the express entry is a system that selects people for 3 programs: Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Federal Skills Trades Program, and the Canadian Experience class. So you may not be eligible for Canadian Experience class. However, you may be eligible as a federal skilled worker as long as you have skilled work experience in your home country. And so I've sat down with clients who are nurses back home, or who perhaps have an occupation that is eligible through express entry in the category selections, and they haven't created a profile. And I'm like, why not? Like, if there was a category based draw, you could be selected under the federal skilled worker program when they do general draws, or when they do category based draws, because you meet the criteria. So if you meet the criteria, go ahead and make the profile. Once you meet the 1 year work experience, then you can go ahead and upload it. Update the information, and you'll realize that the system will now say that you're eligible for CEC and FSW. Someone just said CEC profile creation. So, I mean, it's so vague, but really, you just have to make sure that when you're creating the profile, that you meet the 1 year or the 1,560 hours work experience, and the job that you're doing is skilled. So tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. It also has to be paid work. You can't count co-ops or any internships that you've done for Canadian Experience class. Be mindful that depending on the occupation, you have to have a certain level of language proficiency. And now there's tools, like there's free tools. Even the government has free tools where you can calculate roughly what your score would be. So I invite everyone to kind of play around with the numbers, see, hey, what IELTS score do I need, or what CELPIP score do I need if I want to get X, like this CRS score or that CRS score, right? So that's that. Now we're entering now into questions regarding other provinces and programs. So someone asked, what options do we have to get PR outside of Ontario? And this is a good question, because a lot of times majority of the people that migrate to the biggest provinces, which are Ontario and BC, right? And then Quebec. And once you settle, you kind of want to stay there. I mean, you've built down roots, you want to stay here, you know people. But sometimes if your objective is to get your PR, you may have to go elsewhere to do so. So Ontario is a great province, but I think it's a great province for some people. It might not be the best for everyone. So we have to look at different provincial nominee programs in other provinces. For example, Saskatchewan allows students from other provinces that have taken classes or programs in other provinces the ability to apply through their provincial nominee program, as long as you have 6 months work experience in your field of study, right? So 6 months work experience is way less than if you had to maybe submit an application through Canadian Experience class. We know Manitoba also allows this, but be mindful, because you've studied and worked elsewhere, they're going to deduct points. So you want to make sure that you calculate those points and see where is it going to be worth me risking having to leave there based on the draws prior? Do I have an opportunity based on my current score, right? So we have to calculate, hey, I may meet the 6 month eligibility in Manitoba, but they're going to deduct points because I've worked elsewhere. So what's my score, and what have been the latest draws? Do I have a competitive score or not? We're going to look at federal programs as well. So we know there's a new rural immigration program right now. Sudbury is one of them. I think Lambton is located in Sudbury. Is that right? Yes. So there's been a lot of questions about this, and that's great. Unfortunately, sometimes we know as much as you guys. And what I mean by this is that the government says, hey, we're launching a new program, and it's like crickets, keep you posted. There isn't much information. So we're kind of just waiting what's to come. So we know the general eligibility criteria, and I'll be honest with you, it's very similar, if not exact, to the Atlantic Immigration Program. So if you're a student that has graduated from the community, or from one of these communities, you don't need work experience. If you haven't, then you need one year work experience, which equates to 1,560 hours. You need a job offer from a designated employer. And I think this is key for all of these programs. you need a job offer, you need employer support. I think it's very important. And down the line, I got a question asking me about, what if I don't have a job offer or have a job? It's problematic, right? Because a lot of these programs are attached to work experience or having a job. So going back to the question, if we're looking outside of Ontario, you might want to look at the Atlantic immigration program. It's a very flexible program. So you need a job offer from a designated employer. You need a year's worth 1 year work experience, and the work experience has to be related to the job offer that you're being offered. Keep in mind that they accept tier 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 occupations. The list of these designated employers is public. So my suggestion is, hey, give it a shot. Start applying to these employers and see if you're getting calls, if you're getting any sort of attraction. So you don't also want to leave and kind of just play it by ear. You want to make sure that there's some sort of attraction from employers before making that big move, right? So we want to look at that. The caregiver program was just announced. Again, March 31st, it'll be officially launched. So we know that you need to have 6 months work experience in the field in Canada. But the level of English that they ask for is very low. It's only 6 months of work experience as opposed to having a year. And it's something that's in high demand. So you may have more possibilities of finding a job in an occupation like that. And the Francophone immigration pilot, very similar to the rural program. It's just that the communities are less, but same thing, you need to have a job offer from a designated employer. I think overall, you have to start looking at different ways. French is the golden ticket right now, and I've been saying this. If you look at the draws from the express entry, the Francophone draws have a less CRS score, and they have bigger draws. Last one, I think it was 6,500 people, and the threshold was like 428 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So something that you may want to consider. Now we're getting PR pathways in the Atlantic provinces. So I touched on this. For those that don't know where the what provinces make up the Atlantic, we're looking at New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. New Brunswick recently, I want to say at the maybe 2-3 weeks ago, announced occupations that are going to be ineligible for the Atlantic immigration program. So you want to make sure you check that list. So we have administrative assistants, we have cooks, we have positions in hospitality. So the province really wants to focus on occupations that are in demand. So one of the things that you want to look at is not only, okay, other provinces, well, what are the requirements for each province if I'm looking at the Atlantic provinces per se. Keep in mind that New Brunswick's spots were reduced. So the government announced at the beginning of the year that more spots are going to be allocated through express entry for PR than what the provinces will get. And we've seen this because Ontario hasn't done any draws for this year. So you have to be mindful that you're better off doing it through express entry if you can. But going back to the question with the Atlantic provinces, New Brunswick right now has allocated only 2,700 spots for the whole province for this year. It's not a lot. Nova Scotia has a lot of programs as well through their PNPs, as well as the Atlantic immigration program. Nova Scotia has, similar to Ontario, they also have a PNP that's focused on in-demand or hard-to-fill positions. So you're looking at PSWs, you're looking at construction or general labor. The good thing about these type of programs is that eligibility criteria is lower. You also have a PNP specific for people that are early childhood educators or working in that field. So it's hard to say and to name all of the requirements for each program, but each province does show a pattern of focusing on specific occupations. And that's something that you want to consider. About Sarnia's special PR program, and I think they're talking about the rural immigration program. So that program in particular, as I mentioned, they've launched the general criteria, but we don't have details from the communities. And I think that's what's making it really hard to give people definite answers. I do want to share the screen just so you guys could see what I'm talking about if you haven't visited this. But essentially, we get a sense of what the general criteria is, which is have a valid job offer from a designated employer. Now, when you're looking for these job offers, if I go here, I would then have to look at the community. So for example, if I'm going to Sudbury, I don't know why they said Sarnia because I don't see it here, but if they said Sudbury, I would go to Sudbury's website, and then you'll realize that if I'm a candidate, it'll tell me that they're going to provide more information at a later date, right? So it's not very clear, but we do know that you need a job offer, that you need to meet the work experience criteria. The level of English is a CLB 5, and you need minimum high school diploma or 1 year of post-secondary, right? If you have a job offer, you don't need to show money. That's it. And if you're a student, you don't need to show work experience. Obviously, you have to have graduated from a designated institution. So I think it's going to be beneficial for some of you because you've graduated in Lambton. If you studied in Sudbury, it's great. We just have to cautious of when they actually announce what's going to happen. Can you explain the latest RCIP and Francophone mobility program? Keep talking about this. Okay, so as the same requirements that I just mentioned, same thing applies for the Francophone mobility program. The only difference is the amount of communities that are participating and the language that you have to show proficiency in for obvious reasons, right? So for the RCIP community driven program, we have 14 communities participating. 5 of them are in Ontario, right? Now, for the Francophone, for the French Francophone mobility program or the rural program, we only have 6 communities participating and 3 of them are in Ontario. You need to show a CLB 5 in French. So I know of a lot of students that are actually taking French classes, at least so they could show that they could pass this test. Not necessarily have to be fluent, but I think if you really dedicate some time and space to trying to learn French, you could potentially have a conversational French and you could reach CLB 5. And it also benefit you in express entry if you're able to reach a CLB 7, right? So with that being said, that's the only difference. We don't have a lot of information on those programs, so I do apologize, but just keep checking the website. One question was, other possible pathways for 40-year-olds, is it advisable to move to rural communities if only 1 year and 6 months left on a work permit? So I think it's important to look at programs that don't consider age, right? So if you look at Ontario, for example, the Ontario provincial nominee programs, they don't score you on your age, right? So, but they do have very specific draws depending on the industry that your job offer is in. And we might get into this a little later based on the questions. So Ontario has a focus on health, tech, early childhood educator, and they just announced that ECEs are now going to be another category based in express entry. So there's a specific focus from Ontario in different industries, right? So it'll be very hard if you're working or your job experience or your job offer is outside of these industries to get an invitation. However, Ontario is also very competitive, right? So I would have to assess your score to see whether it would be advisable for you to stay in Ontario. Is it advisable to move to rural communities? I think so. There's a reason why these programs are popping up. There's a reason why these programs are being created, because the government really wants to make sure that these economies grow, that people don't just stay in Toronto, but you go to other cities and you build its economy by working there and staying there, settling there, going to school there, spending money there, etc. So I think it's beneficial. It'll be less competitive for you. It'll be cheaper to live there. So if we look at the Atlantic Immigration Program, it doesn't take into account your age. Doesn't really matter how old you are. They don't care. As long as you have the English proficiency, the education, the job offer from a designated employer, that's it. But then you look at Manitoba's PMP, for example, and anybody over 55 gets 0 points, right? We look at express entry. your age is a factor that will be taken into consideration. So we have to look at the programs and then see where age is a factor and where it isn't. The biggest provinces, which province is offering more PR options? This is a great question because the biggest provinces have more spots available or allocated to them, which is BC and Ontario, but the eligibility criteria is harder to meet in these provinces, right? So while there's more spots to go around, you're also competing with more people, right? Where if you go to other provinces, there may be less spots available, but the eligibility criteria might be lower. So it's something that you want to consider if it's worth maybe staying in Ontario or looking at BC, or perhaps, you know what, although there's less spots, I have more possibilities because my qualifications, my skills, my level of English or French is higher than most people living in that province. Okay, so now we're going to express entry. My express entry points are low right now. How can I possibly increase that? And are there any other pathways that I might be eligible for? Okay, we know the last draw for, let's look at the last draw, but I think it was the last CC draw, I think was 5 something. Like it's been really high. I don't even know how people are gonna get that, to be honest. The last Canadian Experience class draw was 521. They selected, that was on February 5th. Again, going back to French, and I know it sounds crazy, but the last draw on February 19th, they invited 6,500 people and the CRS score was 428. Now, to be selected in this category, you need to have a CLB 7, right? And if you have an intermediate or high level of English in combination with French, then you're going to be awarded either 25 or 50 points, depending on the level. So I think it's worth a shot if you have the time, energy, money to invest in French. That's a way that you could increase your points. Another thing that people were doing was, I'm going to close my work permit. I'm going to try and get my employer who I'm working for right now, that I'm on a PGWP, to issue an LMIA. Problem is that a lot of people did this, and now what we're seeing is that the government announced come spring, they're going to take that away, right? They haven't announced an exact date, but what could have potentially got you 50 points may no longer be the case moving forward. So that's one way to increase French. You also have to see if you're eligible for category-based draws, because sometimes we find the CRS score is a bit lower than if you were to do general or Canadian Experience class. I don't know what your level of English is, so I don't know if you have to improve in that. I mean, it's hard to say with the information that I have. What will be the impacts of the upcoming immigration changes on the CRS score? I'm not sure what they're referring to in terms of changes per se, other than what I've just mentioned, which is the taking away the 50 points or 200 points based on the job offers. I think there's going to be a reduction in the CRS scores. That's my guess, right? Because we've seen there's a combination of things. Pre-COVID, there was a lot of draws and the CRS score was lower. During COVID or during the pandemic, they didn't really issue any ITA. So we had a lot of people kind of stuck in the pool. And then when they did start issuing ITAs, they weren't that big. And so the CRS score was higher. Now we're looking at, okay, more ITAs are rolling around, but the score keeps going up, like it hasn't come down. So, I mean, it's a combination of things. A lot of people are in there. We have more people. Less people are also getting selected. But if they were to take those additional points, then it's definitely going to reduce the CRS score. And someone asked about the LMI reduction in scores. So I just don't know the details of when that's going to happen, but it was announced it's in the spring. So, I mean, it should be coming up soon because April's just around the corner. Okay, so there's an OIMP program going on in Ontario, and I'm a cook and completed my studies from Sarnia, are cooks eligible for this? I think people are talking about ready, which is the, is that what, okay, yes, that's what the other person was mentioning. Ready. So the way it works, first of all, there isn't a lot of spots. I think there's like 50 spots, and that's it. There isn't a lot of spots. That's one. Just to be clear, there's no way of you actually submitting an application per se. You have to be eligible for one of the job offer streams. And if your job offer is in one of these locations, the system itself will take that into account. So it's not like you can apply or it's anything that's separate. So if we look at here, for example, it'll tell you, this was recently announced. These are the participating communities right now. But if an applicant qualifies for the employer job offer stream and it's located in one of these communities, they may qualify, but there's no additional criteria or separate application for the pilot. So there's nothing that you have to do additional. You simply have to be eligible for one of these, and then the system would pretty much select you, right? I want to go, I read somewhere now that there was like only 50 spots, but I don't know if it's here.
I believe it's 200. So there are
200?
like 4 locations. I think it's
Oh
200
yeah, right
per
here,
each.
200. Yes, you're right, 200. My apologies. But yeah, I didn't think there was a lot, like there's not a lot in terms of how many spaces can go around. But yeah, we've been getting a lot of questions like, how do I apply? How do I apply? You don't. You just have to try to get a job in one of those communities. Okay, sorry. Which PMP programs are available in Ontario that are suitable for graduates? I mean, the most common or the most well-known one would probably be the job offer for international students, the provincial nominee program. So Ontario has its provincial nominee programs divided. So there's 3 of them that that require a job offer. And then there's the other 3 that don't require a job offer, but do require you to have an express entry profile, right? Sorry, I take that back. They require you to have an express entry profile. So the one that's for international students, you require a full-time job offer. It has to be skilled job offer, so tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. And as a student, you have to be paid the low wage for that knock. So you have to go to the job bank and see, okay, what's the knock of the occupation that I'm being offered? And then you have to be paid the lowest. You don't need to have any work experience for this stream, but you need to have a job offer that's tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. Now, you as the applicant have to meet this criteria. You have to submit your application within the 2 years of having graduated or received your completion, but also the employer has to meet a certain criteria. So depending on where the job offer is located, so if it's inside the GTA, they have to have a revenue of $1 million. Outside of the GTA, we're looking at $500,000. Outside of the GTA, they need to have 3 employees that are permanent residents or citizens. In the GTA, it's 5, right? So you as the applicant need to meet some criteria, but also the employer. One of the hardest things that we find is that students are unable sometimes to get their employers to jump on board, to get them to support them on this, right? So they're not willing to give them sign the employer form, or they're not willing to go through this because they think there's a legal liability or whatever. So it's important that before you create an expression of interest in Ontario's provincial nominee program, that you understand that you're going to receive that employer support. Otherwise, if you are to get invited, you have 14 calendar days to submit. So you want to make sure that you have that support. However, even though you're a student, you don't necessarily have to apply through that stream. You can also apply through the foreign worker stream. It's just the eligibility criteria for the salary isn't low. Now they have to pay you the medium, and you do need to show work experience of a minimum of 2 years in the job offer or related to the job offer that you're being offered within the last 5 years, right? And you could potentially also apply for in demand stream but these are for low-skilled positions. So you're not necessarily obligated to apply for the student stream. You can apply for the other ones, as well as the streams that are attached to express entry, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria. Someone said, I submitted an expression of interest for OIMP for the international student stream and foreign worker stream. When can I expect the draw? When can I expect the draw and possible score? It's hard to say because there hasn't been any draws and we're now going into March, right? So 2024 was pretty steady. I don't know what to say in terms of this year. I'm hoping that next month the government will get their act together and do something and we'll have a draw. I mean, everybody's waiting, but it's hard to say when, right? We know as much as you guys in terms of that. What we do know is that the draws in 2024 were specific to very industry specific. They only had 2 general draws in the whole year. So it's important to know what's your occupation to see if you even have a shot at receiving an ITA based on the knock of the job offer that you have. Someone said, if I put my file before 2 years of graduation in OINP student program and haven't gotten an invitation, will it still be valid? So the page actually gives you a really good explanation on this, but it's not only having your expression of interest within those 2 years. You need to have your expression of interest, have been invited and submitted your application within those 2 years. So the page will actually gives you an example and they say, for example, if your educational credential is dated June 1st, 2021 or 2021, you need to have done an expression of interest, been invited and submitted your application on or before June 1st, 2023. So everything has to be done, like application submitted within 2 years. It's not just having your expression of interest. So if you're hitting that margin, you may no longer be eligible by the time you get an invitation. What documents does may the company have to present for the OIMP International Student Stream? So for the application itself, they only need 2. They need a job offer that meets all of the requirements and the employer form. However, you may encounter a scenario where the provincial government may request additional information from the employer, and they will do this directly to the employer. They're not going to contact you. They will contact directly the employer. Now, they may want to see all T4s from staff that's currently on payroll. They may want CRA documents. They want to make sure that the revenue that they're declaring, in fact, is the case. Articles of incorporation. So if the business was bought, they want to see when it was bought, how is it structured, but these may or may not be requested, right? Again, your employer has to be on board. So, I mean, right now we're working with a client and he's been very diligent in making sure the employer is aware of everything that may be requested, even if it's not going to be needed for the application. But hey, I want to do this. Will you guys not only offer the job offer, give me the employer for, but in the scenario that this was going to be requested, are you guys willing to give it to the government, right? So you want to make sure you do this because it would be so upsetting to receive an invitation and then midway you simply just can't go through with it because the employer simply says, we're not going to help you. Okay, so OIMP International Student Stream, the employer has only 3 Canadian employees, 2 are on maternity leave. Can the employer support the employee application? So it's important to understand that employees on maternity leave are still considered employees, right? So there's still an employer and employee relationship. So as long as the job offer is outside of the GTA, then they meet the criteria because they have the 3 employees, right? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you find out if the 2 people that are on maternity leave are counted as active full-time employees, right? I'm not sure if the employer is gonna disclose this information with you, but technically, even though they're on maternity leave, they're still eligible. It's just a matter of making sure that they're considered active full-time employees. If I have 1 year job experience, could I apply for a PNP in Ontario? Will I require support from my employer to apply? So, more than having I need to know what the 1 year job experience is in, right? It's because it can't just be in any job. So if you have a job offer, you would be eligible for the job offer streams as long as you have employer support. So that answers your question. Will I require support from my employer? If it's in one of these streams, you're going to require employer support. Now, if you're doing it through the streams that are through express entry, then you're not going to need employer support. However, in order for you to be eligible for one of these streams, you need to be eligible for one of the express entry streams. So the 1 year job experience has to make you eligible for a Canadian experience class or federal skilled worker, right? And then you wouldn't need an employer support. So it just depends. We're getting close to the end. So some of the questions are like very generic. Someone's asking about the human capital opportunities and the OIMP student stream. So the human capital, it's linked to express entry. So essentially the applicant would have to have an express entry profile and be eligible for Canadian experience class or the federal skilled worker program. They need to have a bachelor's, master's, or PhD. And if you've studied outside of Canada, then you need to get your educational credential assessment in order to attest that you have this level of education. You have to have a CLB 7. Now, with that being said, and something that we discussed, I think, more in detail in the first session, was that Ontario has a very specific focus on the draws that it does. So I have some details here, but for example, February 8th of last year, they did one draw through express entry human capital, and it was for tech occupations. And there's a very specific list of tech occupations that were invited. If we look at February 6th of last year, they did a draw for health occupations. So we see a pattern with Ontario in terms of those occupations that are getting invited, whether it's health or whether it's tech, right? Or whether it's the trades. So even though you may be eligible, you need to make sure that your occupation is going to get you selected in enough time, right? Because if you have a year left or you only have 2 years left, just because you have an expression of interest doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be invited, right? You could be waiting for a long time. So you need to have plan B just in case there isn't any general draws at all. LMIAs. I want to know how long the 50 points of LMIA are valid. We have an LMIA approved to work permit. So again, it's only going to, it depends. So there's two things. There's some LMIAs support PR. So the minute that LMIA is approved, you can claim your points, right? However, if you have an LMIA, but it doesn't support your PR, but you've been working for this employer, you should have been working for this employer for at least a year, right? So it just really depends on the type of LMIA. With that being said, you can't just claim the points automatically if it's not a LMIA that supports PR, right? It will be based on how much work experience you have with that employer. So in that account, if come spring you don't meet that criteria, then you will no longer be eligible to claim those points. So it's really going to be based on the time that you've been working for the employer. Specific jobs and fields. So for those of you that are working in tech and IT, and I know Lambton has great programs in tech, we're getting a lot of questions in regards to what are the PR options. If you look at the draws that Ontario has done in terms of tech, whether it's through the offer streams or through the human capital streams, there's specific knock occupations that are being selected. Ontario does a terrible job and like the way they organize their information, but I would like to show you guys something just so you guys know what I'm talking about. So if we look at the draws that were issued in 2024, I'll tell you exactly how they're divided. Now, with that being said, you'll see that you'll have targeted draws, right? What we want to do, let's go look at here. So for example, employer job offer international stream. So we had, again, health, we had skills trades, then we had other priority occupations, health, early childhood educators, trades, health, and tech. So if we look at we go to the page, you can actually, they organize this by month, and this is where it gets complicated because it's really hard to find the information. But if we click here, it'll give us the knocks of all the occupations and techs that qualify. So there's two things that you have to look at. The score that you must have, which is 40 and above, as well as the job offer must be in one of these knocks in order to have received an ITA. So for international students, if you've studied, let's say if you studied in Lambton, for example, and you want to apply through the stream, keep in mind it's a point-based system, right? So you're not just going to receive an ITA right off the bat. So I've had students, and I was telling Christina this, I've had students that have studied in Lambton in STEMs, they're getting 12 points right off the bat simply because of the field of study. But then they're going to get additional points because the category of the job offer that they're receiving is also considered in demand. So they're going to get additional points. So they have more of a competitive edge in Ontario than maybe somebody that has an administrative role, right? Somebody with an administrative role would only probably get selected in the general draws. But if we look at the draws for international students, they only had one draw in March 12th, or sorry, two. They had one February 8th and March 12th. There weren't any other draws for general draws. So if you're an administrative assistant, you're only going to be selected if your score is 72 and above or 78 and above, because every other draw was very focused on certain industries and certain knocks, not just industry, but knocks. I think because I made this visual, I think it's because I've just been repeating it, but once you see it, I think it's easier to understand. Now there's just other questions. So how to get a field job tier 1 or 2? One of the things that I did as a student, or one of the things that I recommend you guys do before you graduate, is that you start your job search early. So a lot of you guys may not utilize or may be unaware of the things that are offered by Lambton, but take advantage of them, take full advantage of them. How to build your resume, how to interview well, how to sell yourself. All of those things are very important. So you pay tuition, and this is including your tuition, utilize it wisely. So start your job search very early, because it's going to take time to get a good job, especially if you're here with your spouse and you're like, oh shoot, now I need to get a tier 0 or 1 position if I want to extend my spouse, or it needs to get a tier 2 or 3, and it has to be specific. You have to make sure that you start your job search very early and that you apply accordingly. There's no point in applying to 100 jobs with the same resume. If you're only going to get 1 or 2 calls, you're better off applying to maybe 30 jobs, but then you're getting 10, 15 calls, right? So that would be my recommendation. I can't tell you how to get a job. I think it's also networking is very important, and I think a lot of people don't do it. LinkedIn, don't be afraid of hitting up people and saying, hey, I applied for the position, wanted to just, let you know. I used to work with people and try to help them find jobs through the non-for-profit that I worked at. Networking is very important. One of the things that employers do when they post a job or before they do is, does anybody know someone for this position, right? So you want to make sure that you let people know, I'm job searching, this is what I'm job searching for. Really attend a lot of networking events, fix your resume, use LinkedIn to start talking to people, et cetera, et cetera. How should we report salary if job bank only shows the median wage, but the role is entry level? I'm not sure what they mean by this. Do you know, Christina? How should we report salary if job bank only shows the median wage, but the role is entry? So, okay, I think
Really.
I think I may understand. I'm not sure. So even though it's entry level, so think of job bank, it's basically stats, right? So that's just accumulated data based on information of an approximation of what a person should get paid in that occupation, in that location, right? Some people are going to get paid more, some people are going to get paid less. I mean, by law, they have to pay you minimum wage or higher, right? But then employers have leeway to a certain extent on what they pay somebody based on their experience, based on the occupation, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure what you mean by how we will report salary. Depending on the immigration program, it has to be the medium, whether we like it or not, whether we agree or not. It's just the way it is. But just for everybody, that's just how the job bank functions. I'm trying to, some of these are like, I'm gonna go now with the ones that are, I think would be most relevant to people. My previous employer is not including my salary on the experience letter. What do I have to do while submitting documents? Immigration doesn't care so much about your salary. They care about whether you were paid or not for that occupation. So if they don't want to disclose the amount, if they're able to say that you were paid, that it was a paid position, that's fine. If you have any sort of pay stubs, any contract from that with that employer, anything that shows that it was in fact paid, and it shows the amount, you can then write an explanation letter and provide that as an explanation, right? So don't focus so much on the salary per se. I think what's important is to show that it was a paid position, right? So we want to make sure that we're not making it seem like it was a volunteer position or unpaid. That's all that really matters, right? What if I'm currently pregnant and not working? Are there any other chances of getting PR after I give birth? This is a hard question because, so we've had cases where students do get pregnant and they can apply for their PGWP, no problem. When they go on mat leave, they're still considered employed, right? Like I mentioned before. So your chances of getting PR will really depend on when your PGWP is over or what status you would have at the time that you would go back to work or you would start job searching again, right? Now in practice, the likelihood of someone perhaps getting a job further in their pregnancy it's going to be harder for various reasons. But it's hard to say. I wasn't able to answer all of them. I think we'll be here all night. I tried my very, very best. There were a lot of questions in regards to, like, some people were asking like best immigration path and things of that nature, and it's hard to say. What I do want to leave you guys with, let me see, which one? Would a proper reference letter from my employer, would a proper reference letter from my employer from home country would be suffice to provide my foreign work experience? Yes, so be very mindful. I had a client reach out to me. He had received an ITA and it was refused because the reference letters that he provided from back home were insufficient. They were incorrect. So not all countries have the same practice when providing a reference letter like Canada does. And I think that's important. So it's very important that it's in the template of the company logo and has all of their information. It needs to have obviously your name, your position, hours worked, which is very important. Remember I mentioned it's not the time worked, but the hours worked. So how many hours worked how many hours did you work per week? your salary or were you paid, right? Was it yearly, hourly, semi-weekly, etc.? Your job duties as well as the job title. So that's another thing. Be very mindful of the not being used with the job duties. One of the most common mistakes is going into the job bank and literally copying and paste all of the job duties. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure though that the job duties that you're putting in your job reference align to the occupation that you're claiming points for. So a job reference suffices, but it has to be the right one. There's a lot of information as to what this job reference should look like. We actually provide our clients with, I don't want to say a template because I don't want everyone having the same exact letter, but it gives you a guideline on what should be included so you can request this from your employer. It's not just any job reference. Yeah, I think that's it. I hope I answered everyone's questions. Again, we got tons of questions. It's really hard to kind of answer everything in great detail. One of the things that I want to leave you guys with is if it's one thing that you could do for yourselves is really invest either your time to research all of these programs and see what you're eligible for or whatnot. But if you want assistance, investing in a consultation be the best thing to do, because in 1 hour we can assess your case and say, hey, you can go here, you can go there. These are what's available to you. These are your options. This is what you need to do, right? So rather than seeing it as an expense, you see it as an investment that's going to save you time and money in the long run. Nonetheless, it was a pleasure being here with everyone. I hope that I answered everyone's questions. We would be more than glad to assist you if you were to be in touch with us. I'll just leave our email down here. And Christina, thanks for the invite.
No, thank you so much, Sandra. It was great as the morning as well. We got a lot of questions and we sent to Velosa Immigration to Sandra all the questions that we got till yesterday noon. So all the questions that you've been typing in the Q&A, unfortunately, we couldn't go through it because we already asked for the questions in advance. And that's what we have done. I'm going to send a recording of this session and the morning session where we covered a lot as well. So I recommend you to watch that one as well. We do have specific webinars on international student stream, and we will also have a webinar next month about French. Also, we're going to have another one next morning, and we're going to have a CELPIP webinar next month as well. So you can join our sessions and you can get more specific information in each one of these different streams. But as Sandra said, you saw her, she didn't, she just continues talking and talking for almost more than an hour. So she replied as much as we could possibly do. It's a lot of questions. So I think this webinar answered pretty much the great majority of our questions. Again, if you have questions, specific questions, you can book this an appointment with Sandra. You got the 10% discount, and we will be covering more sessions in the upcoming month. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Sandra, it's been great working with you, and I hope to see you everybody in our upcoming events.
1 second, I just feel bad. I feel bad for this person. 1 second. Someone's Cheryl, if you're still here, rather than sending, it's long, but rather than sending a web form, you actually have to submit a form physically, because there was an error in the permit, so you have to request a new one, right? So this has happened. We've had issues when you're issued a wrong work permit, study permit, work permit. Sometimes they'll put that you can't work outside of campus, and students are like, what the heck? You just have to request for that to be amended. It does take several weeks, but I'm afraid a web form is not going to do much. And this is what I mean. I think she called immigration and they're telling her to do a web form. That's not going to help you. So this is what I mean by saving time and money. With doing it. I just saw that popped up. I'm like, you need to do something else about that. But thank you guys. Good night. It was a pleasure. You guys have a good day. Bye.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thanks, graduates, and I'll see you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.